go through the albums that have high critical praise this year but aren't making it onto my list. This is a sweet little folk album. Adrian Lenker has a really unusual voice, and the recording of this album sounds really interesting. Didn't make my list because I got a little bored. Moses Sumney sings in quite a high falsetto that can put some people off. I think it did me to an extent, but I think his songwriting and the production and instrumental choices here are interesting and worth checking out if you're interested in art pop. I couldn't quite get into it, and I think it's a production thing. It's very soft on the ears. The instrumental presence sounds a bit distant. I was pretty excited for this album, but there were a lot of moments on it that I found really disappointing. So Heavy I Fell Through the Earth, for example, just feels like one long intro, and I think that several songs on this album suffer from that. There was a lot I found super interesting right off the bat about this one. Caribou takes a really interesting sampling technique, and it has this really immediate, flashy sound to it. The songs themselves didn't really hold up after multiple listenings, at least for me. Again, this is one that I sense it is a pretty good album, and I just couldn't get into it. The big single, Gospel for a New Century, I think is a really interesting song, but it wasn't quite for me. This is a fun album. I think what holds it back a little bit is being a little generic, but then again, there are also moments on this album that really work great. Check it out if you're interested in some dance pop. I ended up not really liking it. There are definitely tracks on it that I do like. I love Shamika and Under the Table, but for the most part, the songs on this album, there's at least one thing that really rubs me the wrong way. Sometimes it's the spoken word verses or choruses that she delivers. She has some kind of weird word choices and some weird kind of ways of saying and singing things that put me off as well. So again, this might be a personal taste thing. You might like it more than I do. I'm a bit sad not to be including this one on my list because I love Jeff Rosenstock. He has an incredible vocal presence. And even for this one, it might be the case that I just need to give it a few more listens. I need to sit with it a little longer and I'll enjoy it more. And I think it comes down to some of the vocal choices on the songs that came across as too shouty, and so I was having a hard time pinning down the song itself. Wow, I mean, talk about the contrast between the fantastic singles and those other album cuts that I just think that a lot of Weeknd songs are really dreary. Now, this is just my personal opinion. Love Blinding Lights. I love In Your Eyes. He does them so well, and he pulls together such great collaborations with his producers. But then there's so many other moments on the album that are just like this monotone vocal riffing on instrumentals that feel like they're going nowhere. The reason this one didn't make my list is because I just found myself getting a little bored by a lot of these tracks. Having said that, there are some really good songs on here. My favorite is probably Murphy's Law. This is a really interesting album. I think it's got some really interesting production on it. There's these high-pitched tones in the production that kind of detract from the album listening experience. So before I listened to it, I went through and actually removed those high tones. And so I've never actually heard the album as it's supposed to sound. And I did that because I was hoping that I would go through the experience and enjoy it a lot more. But even with those alterations that I made to my listening experience, it's not ending up on my list. There are a lot of good songs on here. A lot of them are pretty long-winded. I really love Sufjan's songwriting on this, and the production is really quite interesting as well, though. So if you're into Sufjan Stevens, you should check this one out.